In a moment that stunned the White House press corps and left viewers across America speechless, a simple question from a journalist triggered one of the most unexpected confrontations in recent presidential history. Today, we're diving deep into what really happened when President Biden lost his composure, the words that left a room full of hardened journalists in shock, and the legal threat that has Washington insiders questioning everything they thought they knew about the administration's relationship with the press. But first, what you're about to see isn't just another political spat. This is about the fundamental relationship between power and truth in America. The question that started it all? It seemed innocent enough on the surface. The response? Well, that's why we're here. I'm Josh, and this is the full story of what happened, why it matters, and what it means for the future of presidential accountability. Before we get to the confrontation itself, let's set the stage. The Biden presidency has had its share of tense moments with the press. From the early days of his administration, Biden's relationship with journalists has been complicated. Unlike his predecessor, Biden initially promised a return to normalcy, regular briefings, respect for the press, and transparency. But as the months wore on, a pattern began to emerge. Limited access, carefully controlled environments, pre-selected questions. Many in the White House press corps have privately expressed frustration, but few were prepared for what happened last week. The setting was a routine economic briefing. Inflation numbers had just been released. What should have been a straightforward press event was about to become anything but. The journalist at the center of this storm is Catherine Reynolds, a veteran reporter known for her straightforward, no-nonsense approach. Reynolds had been covering the White House for over 12 years across 3 administrations. She wasn't known for gotcha questions or partisan attacks, just persistent, fact-based inquiry. As the official portion of the briefing concluded, Biden, as he sometimes does, took a few questions. Reynolds raised her hand, and the president nodded in her direction. The seasoned journalist stands confidently, mic in hand. "Mr. President," she begins, her voice steady and professional. "Documents have emerged suggesting your administration received intelligence about economic issue 6 weeks before you told the American people it was being addressed. Can you explain the discrepancy in the timeline?" It was the kind of question presidents face regularly, tough but fair, based on reported information, and giving the president an opportunity to clarify or correct the record. What happened next left the room in shock. According to multiple witnesses in the room, the president's demeanor changed instantly. Biden's face flushes. He grips the podium so tightly his knuckles whiten. And then he snaps. "Now listen here," the president barks, his voice rising sharply. "I've been in public service longer than you've been alive. Don't you come at me with that garbage." Reporters in the room described an immediate tension. This wasn't the typical political deflection or frustration. This was something different. Reynolds, to her credit, doesn't back down. "Sir," she attempts to clarify, "I'm just asking for clarification on the timeline based on..." Before she can finish, the president cuts her off abruptly. "You know what?" Biden interrupts, his finger now pointing directly at Reynolds. "That's libel. That's a libelous question." His voice grows even more intense as he adds, "My team will be in touch with your editors. We're not going to stand for this kind of irresponsible reporting." And with that, White House staff quickly moved to end the briefing, with the president storming away from the podium as reporters shout follow-up questions that hang unanswered in the air. Within minutes, the exchange was trending nationwide. Video clips spread across social media like wildfire, with political pundits from both sides weighing in. Legal experts immediately questioned the president's use of the term libel, noting that a question, especially one based on reported documents, would be virtually impossible to classify as libelous. One prominent legal analyst appears on screen, brow furrowed in concern. "What we saw today was extraordinary," she explains. "A sitting president threatening a journalist with legal action for asking a question. That's not how libel works, and it's certainly not how the First Amendment works." Former White House press secretaries from multiple administrations chimed in as well. James Carlton, who served under a Republican president, stated, "I've been in that room during tense moments. I've seen presidents frustrated, even angry. But threatening legal action against a reporter? That crosses a line we've carefully avoided for generations. Maria Sanchez, who served in a Democratic administration, added, "The relationship between a president and the press corps is inherently adversarial, but it's also symbiotic. What we witnessed today threatens that delicate balance." Within hours, the White House communications team was in damage control mode. Their official statement claims the president had been taken out of context and that he was simply expressing frustration at what they called misinformation, though they didn't specify what information was incorrect. Senior administration officials began making calls to network executives and editorial boards, attempting to frame the incident as a simple misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an overeager press. But the press corps wasn't buying it. Something unprecedented had happened, and the relationship between this president and the Fourth Estate had fundamentally changed. White House Chief of Staff Marcus Johnson appeared on several morning shows the next day, offering what many viewed as a tepid defense. "The president has always respected the role of a free press," Johnson insisted, looking uncomfortable. He simply felt that the premise of the question mischaracterized certain facts that aren't in dispute. When pressed on which facts were mischaracterized, Johnson deflected, saying only that discussions are ongoing and that the administration was focused on addressing the real issues facing Americans. Catherine Reynolds issued her own statement that evening through her news organization. "My question to President Biden was based on documented information that has been independently verified," she asserts firmly. "The role of a free press is to ask difficult questions of those in power. I stand by my question and the reporting behind it." Reynolds' colleagues rallied behind her, with statements of support coming from journalists across the political spectrum. In an unprecedented move, the White House Correspondents Association issued a strongly worded statement expressing grave concern over the president's comments and demanding a formal apology to Reynolds and a commitment to respecting press freedoms. Perhaps most tellingly, even news organizations typically friendly to the administration expressed concern about the president's reaction and the implicit threat against a reporter doing her job. Reynolds herself made limited public appearances in the days following the incident, but in one brief interview, she revealed something telling about the moment. "What concerned me most wasn't the anger," she explained. "Presidents get angry. What concerned me was the specific threat of legal action against a news organization for asking a question. That's not something we've seen before, at least not so explicitly. This is hardly the first time a president has clashed with the press. The relationship has always been complicated, oscillating between cooperation and confrontation. Thomas Jefferson, despite being a champion of press freedom in principle, complained bitterly about newspapers during his presidency, writing to a friend that nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper. Theodore Roosevelt coined the term muckraker for journalists he felt focused too much on scandal. Richard Nixon famously told his press secretary that the press is the enemy, and his administration compiled an enemies list that included numerous journalists. Donald Trump regularly called media outlets fake news and described the press as the enemy of the people. But direct threats of legal action against individual reporters for asking questions? That represents a new frontier in this long-standing tension. Dr. Eleanor Winters, presidential historian at Georgetown University, provides context. What makes this moment particularly significant is that it wasn't just expressing frustration with coverage, which presidents have always done. This was explicitly threatening punitive action against a journalist for doing precisely what the First Amendment protects. By nightfall, the incident had morphed from a momentary loss of temper into something more significant, a test case for press freedom in an increasingly polarized environment. The documents that sparked Reynolds' question contained communications between senior administration officials regarding a policy decision that contradicted public statements. While their authenticity hasn't been disputed, their interpretation has become a battleground. According to sources within the government who requested anonymity, the documents show a decision timeline that differs significantly from the administration's public narrative. If accurate, they suggest the White House misled the public about when certain decisions were made and who was involved in making them. Senator James Morrison, chair of the Oversight Committee, announced that his committee would be launching an investigation into both the content of the documents and the president's response to questions about them. The American people deserve to know the truth, Morrison stated, and reporters deserve to ask questions without being threatened. Internationally, the incident raised eyebrows and prompted statements from press freedom organizations worldwide. Reporters Without Borders issued a statement calling the president's reaction deeply concerning and reminiscent of tactics used by authoritarian regimes to intimidate journalists. Several foreign leaders, including those of traditional U.S. allies, expressed concern about the implications for democratic norms. The incident provided ammunition to autocratic regimes eager to deflect criticism of their own press restrictions. When America threatens its journalists, it weakens its moral authority to champion press freedom elsewhere, noted one European diplomat who spoke on condition of anonymity. Public reaction to the confrontation fell largely along partisan lines, but with some surprising crosscurrents. Polling conducted in the days following showed that while most voters aligned with their party's position, there was significant concern across the political spectrum about the precedent being set. A surprising 64% of respondents, including majorities from both parties, agreed that presidents should answer difficult questions from the press without threatening reporters, regardless of whether they believe the questions are fair. Social media analysis revealed intense debate, with hashtags both supporting and criticizing the president trending simultaneously. Video clips of the exchange were viewed over 50 million times within 48 hours. The incident also sparked debate within journalism circles about how to respond when facing such threats. Some argued that news organizations should double down on investigating the documents in question, refusing to be intimidated. Others worried about further inflaming tensions at a time when trust in media was already at historic lows. Media ethics expert Professor Maria Chen weighed in. Journalists have an obligation to pursue truth, but they also need to consider how their approach affects public trust. This incident presents a real dilemma for news organizations trying to balance accountability journalism with concerns about appearing partisan. Several news organizations announced special coverage initiatives focused on government transparency and accountability, regardless of which party holds power. So what does this incident tell us about the current state of the presidency, the press, and the public's right to know? First, it reveals the immense pressure facing this administration as it navigates multiple crises. The flash of anger suggests a president feeling cornered, whether by circumstances or by questions he believes are unfair. Second, the legal threat, however empty it might be in practice, represents a dangerous precedent. Presidents have complained about the press since the founding of the Republic, but threatening legal action crosses a line that even the most press-hostile administrations have rarely approached. Third, it exposes the fragility of norms we've taken for granted. The tradition of presidential accountability through press questioning only works if both sides accept the fundamental rules of the game. Fourth, it demonstrates how quickly a single moment can redefine a presidency. For an administration that had positioned itself as a defender of democratic institutions, this incident created a jarring contradiction that opponents were quick to highlight. Fifth, it shows the power of visual media in shaping public perception. The president's pointing finger, the reporter's steady gaze, the tense body language of staff members, these images communicated something that transcended the words exchanged. In the days since this confrontation, neither the president nor Reynolds has backed down. The documents in question remain a subject of intense debate, with some arguing their significance and others questioning their interpretation. Just this morning, 3 former White House officials came forward to corroborate key elements of the documents, adding credibility to Reynolds' line of questioning. The White House press office announced that the president will hold a formal press conference next week, an apparent attempt to reset relations with the media. Sources within the administration suggest heated debate about whether the president should address the confrontation directly or try to move past it without acknowledgement. Congressional leaders from the opposition party have called for hearings on both the substance of the documents and what they term intimidation of the press. Civil liberties organizations have filed Freedom of Information Act requests seeking any communications about Reynolds or her news organization that might reveal a coordinated attempt to pressure journalists. What's not debatable is this: in a democracy, the right to question power is non-negotiable. When a president, any president, suggests otherwise, we all have reason for concern. Media historian Dr. Jonathan Freeman offers this perspective. Throughout American history, the relationship between presidents and the press has evolved through moments of crisis. This may be such a moment, one that either strengthens our commitment to press freedom or begins a dangerous erosion of that fundamental principle. For the Biden administration, this represents a critical juncture. The coming days will determine whether this incident becomes a footnote in history or a defining characteristic of this presidency. For the press corps, it presents both a challenge and an opportunity to stand firm in their essential role while avoiding the trap of making themselves the story. For the American public, it offers a moment to reflect on what we expect from both our leaders and our media in a functioning democracy. As this story continues to unfold, remember what's at stake. This isn't about politics or personalities. It's about principles that transcend partisanship, transparency, accountability, and the freedom of the press to ask uncomfortable questions without fear of retaliation. The Biden administration now faces a choice: double down on a moment of anger or recommit to the principles of press freedom that have guided this nation through its darkest hours. The question that started this controversy remains unanswered. But an even more important question lies before us. What kind of relationship do we want between those who hold power and those who question it? In the words of Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, the press was protected so that it could bear the secrets of government and inform the people. That protection isn't just a legal technicality. It's an essential component of the system of checks and balances that preserves our democracy. As we watch this story develop in the coming days and weeks, we'll be monitoring not just what is said, but what is done. Will there be substantive answers to the original questions about those documents? Will there be meaningful recommitment to press freedoms? Or will we see further attempts to delegitimize tough questioning? The answers matter not just for this administration or this moment, but for the precedents they set for future presidents and the challenges they may face.